Hi, my name is Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I thought I would do a video all about DNFing. So since joining BookTube a little over a year ago, I seem to have earned quite a reputation for DNFing a lot of books, which is true. So I thought I'd do a video talking about DNFing, why I DNF, the various reasons that might cause me to give up on a book, how I think DNFing influences and benefits my reading, and also some of the reading habits and reading preferences that I have, which I think make me more likely to DNF more frequently than someone else. So, it's only in the last year or so that I've really become conscious of how much I DNF. And that is partly being on BookTube, talking about books and the books that I read and give up on, and also hearing about other people talking about how often they DNF books. The other thing is that it's only this year that I have been recording my DNFs properly on Storygraph. I just didn't used to record them before when I was on Goodreads, but it's really, really easy to record DNFs on Storygraph. So as we have been going through the year, I've been having a look and calculating my DNF rate. As of today, as I'm filming, we're about halfway through October, and I've read 124 books so far this year, and I have DNF'd an additional 57 books, which puts my DNF rate at 31% so far for this year. I realise that sounds very high. If you'd asked me to estimate my DNF rate before I started recording it, I probably would have guessed between 20 to 25%. So it is a bit higher than even I was expecting. So in terms of my history with DNFing, as far as I can remember, I have always DNF books, and it's never been something that I have agonised over. It's just a natural part of my reading. I understand that some people might say, you know, if you persevered with the book, maybe you would end up really liking it. And undoubtedly, there will be probably many books that I have DNF'd. Had I persevered with them, I may well have liked them, but it's also true that there will be many books I have DNF'd which, had I persevered with them, I would not have ended up liking them. So it's a balance, isn't it? And for me, it benefits my reading to DNF when I just get the feeling that I want to DNF. So the different sort of things that can make me DNF. It might be that I just get bored of the book. I have no desire to pick it up anymore. Generally that happens when I am further into the book. Sometimes it might be that there is something actually overtly offensive in there, which will cause me to DNF a book. That happened recently with the sweetness at the bottom of the pie, incredibly racist section in the middle of the book. So I DNF'd it. Sometimes it might be because a book is too disturbing for me. That happened with The Cellar by Richard Lehman a couple of months ago. I don't mind, like, I have a reasonably high tolerance level for disturbingness, I think. But sometimes there's some stuff that is too much for me. It might be there's a certain theme or topic that is just something that I personally don't want to read about. And also, following on from that, sometimes there might be a theme, so like a serious sort of theme or topic, which I perceive to be being dealt with or spoken about in a flippant way. If I feel like the author is doing that, that is something that also makes me DNF. If I DNF a book fairly early on, the reason for that tends to be that I just don't like the narrative voice or the writing style. That's not to say that I have a problem with sort of experimental writing or writing books that are trying to do something a bit different. That's fine. But if I just don't like it, then that's a reason for me DNFing quite early on. Another reason I might DNF quite early on is if the author throws 10 million characters at you in the first chapter, because I can't deal with more than about 4 characters. So that can make me DNF a book quite early on as well. I will DNF a book at any point. I've said it before, I'll DNF a book on page 2, I'll DNF a book on page 400. It's interesting to look at the books that I have DNF this year so far, because it's not like I'm making, that I'm like choosing books that are widely outside of my comfort zone and those are the books that I'm DNFing. There's many books that I've DNF'd this year by authors who I have read and enjoyed books from before. So, for example, Devotion by Hannah Kent. I read about, I think, half of Devotion and I didn't really like the way it went and I just sort of lost interest in it. And there were a few too many characters, I think, as well. I got a bit confused. Shirley Jackson, The Road Through the Wall, I've DNF recently, quite early on. That was because there was too many characters for me to follow. I've read Shirley Jackson before, really like her. Sarah Pinborough's latest book, Insomnia, that was published this year, I DNF that one. Whereas I think all her previous books I've read, I've rated very highly. Josh Marleman, DNF'd his latest. Claire McIntosh, DNF'd her latest. Blake Crouch, DNF'd his latest. And when you look at sort of the genres of books I DNF, there's literary fiction, there's crime fiction, thrillers. I'm not reading like totally, fantasy that I would never normally read or really sort of out there, out of my comfort zone genres. And this is why it's strange, because the fact I DNF so much, I feel like people probably think that I don't know what my taste is, but I think I do. I think with some of the aspects, some of what I've said about why, things that might make me want to DNF a book, some of that's difficult to predict in advance. So if it is something about the writing style, the narrative voice, and often it's something that I couldn't quite pinpoint exactly what it is, that's difficult to predict in advance. And often it's just a feeling, and it's not even like much of a conscious thought. If I just get the feeling that I want to DNF this book, I just DNF the book. There are occasions when I do go back to a DNF, although it doesn't happen that often. One time it did happen this year with success was Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. So I initially picked this up because it was on the Women's Prize long list. I DNF'd it because I just got a bit bored of the writing style. There was quite a lot of backstory going on. So I DNF'd it, and then I heard other people talk about it after they had read it, and I thought I probably do want to go back to this at some point. Then it was shortlisted, so I decided to pick it up, and it turned out I really loved it. Some other books that I have DNF that I do want to go back to are The Unconsoled by Kazuo Ishiguro, which it's several years ago that I tried to read that, and The Unconsoled is quite a sort of a dream-like novel, and I had recently been unwell, and so it just wasn't the right time for me to read that book, but I very much want to head back to it at some point. Another book I DNF that I do want to return to is Beloved by Toni Morrison, and the reason I DNF that one, I read about half of it, and it's not a long book, but somehow I found myself getting a bit confused and not really following what was going on, and then I found myself almost starting to skim read it, which is not something that I would normally do, but I decided I just needed to put it to one side, and I will give it another go in future, but my plan is to read some more Toni Morrison first before heading back to Beloved. So there are a couple of reading habits, reading preferences that I have, which I think probably makes me more likely to DNF. The first is an obvious one, and it's the fact that I use my library. Most of my reading comes from the library, and so because it's not a book that I have bought, I don't feel bad about not finishing it. If I do DNF a book that I have bought, which does happen, but most of my books that I do buy are second-hand. Occasionally I buy a new book. Often it's when I've asked for a book as a birthday present or something. And I do feel a little bit bad about DNFing a book that either myself or someone has paid full price for. Yes, I can't deny it. I do feel a little bit bad about that, but I still DNF. And then the thing with my library ordering as well is I just need to know very little about a book before I reserve it from the library. So it'll just be, I've heard someone mention something about it, or I've seen it in an article. If I think it's something that I am interested in, and if the library has it, I will get it out the library. Like, I won't bother with looking at more reviews or reading more into what the plot of the book or anything like that. I will just get it out the library. And I guess that potentially, if I were to do a bit more research before, potentially that could lower my DNFs. Although saying that, as I've said, a lot of my DNFs are from authors that I've read from and very much enjoyed before, so who knows. Another reading habit that I have, which I do think influences my DNFing quite a lot, and it's something which I've only realised in the last couple of months. So I'd be interested to know your thoughts on this. And it's the fact that I only read one book at a time. So certainly in terms of novels, I will only read one book at a time because my brain just can't deal with multiple books at once. So if I'm reading a book and I'm sort of quite far into it and I'm just not feeling it, I'm getting bored and I'm sort of losing the desire to keep picking it up, I would DNF that book. Now, if I was someone who read more than one book at once, perhaps I would put that book to one side, pick something else up for a couple of days, and then go back to that first book and maybe feel sort of reinvigorated to pick it up again. So I'll be interested to know if you do read more than one book at once, if that can affect your reading in that way, because I do wonder how much of my DNFing is down to the fact that I can't just leave books to one side. I mean, even if I'm only reading one book at a time, I have to read it quite consistently. I have to be like immersed in that book. I can't have gaps where I'm not reading. Otherwise, I will forget what's happened. I'll be pulled out of the book, and I just don't enjoy that. One thing that I did want to mention, which I thought is quite interesting, I'm just going to bring up my story graph and I'll put a little inserted screenshot here. Is that when I've heard some other people talk about DNFing, they say things like, if you think a book is going to be 2 stars, so as you're reading it and if you're thinking this is going to be a 2-star book, DNF it. That's not how I DNF at all. That doesn't play a part in my DNFing personally. So I'll put a little picture of my star ratings for the year so far. So my average rating for the year so far is 3.32 stars. I do think I probably have a slightly lower rating system than some other people. So like a 3-star for me is a good book. And then a 2-star means it's okay, it's fine, or I didn't really love it. And then a 1-star is where we're getting into the I actively dislike this book. So I don't have very many 1 or 1.5 stars at all, as you can see, but I do have a fair amount of 2 stars there. So as I'm reading a book, I do in my head think about what the star rating is, and it can go up or down as I'm reading the book. But even if I'm thinking it's a 2-star book, that doesn't in itself make me DNF the book, weirdly. I'm quite happy to finish a 2-star book. I don't know what that's about, but that seems a bit strange. So in terms of how DNFing benefits my reading, if I didn't DNF, if I forced myself to finish all the books I picked up, well, I think 2 things would happen. I think I'd probably stop reading, because if I was making myself push through books that I really wasn't enjoying, I would just stop reading. And the other thing, I guess, is I'd probably have to be a lot more selective about the books I'm picking up if I knew I had to finish reading them. Although, as I've said, it's really hard to know with me if a book is going to be a 5-star or if it's going to be a DNF, and it's really hard to predict that in advance. But yeah, for me personally, DNFing absolutely benefits my reading. I would not read as much as I do if I didn't DNF. I'd be interested to know what you think about DNFing. Do you DNF? Why or why not? What's your DNF ratio for the year so far if you record these things? Yeah, I would be very interested to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Bye.